Hello and welcome to the Good Art Friends, where good friends discuss good art. Jonathan, my friend, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing well. We are in a double good time. Not only is it baseball season, it's also playoff hockey time.
Oh, yeah. I feel like last time we did this bit.
Yes.
You're playing with fire. Last time we did this bit. So as a reminder, we record the first part weeks ahead of the second part because, there's the non-spoiler part, and then we engage in the art, and then we come back and talk about it. Last time we did this bit was in the fall, and you're like, yay, Carolina Hurricanes playoff series. And then when we came back for the second part, they were already out. So,
okay, well, they won that first series.
Yeah. I think it was right between those two.
Yeah, we started recording during the Islander series of the first round, and then they got to the second round, and they did not win against the Rangers in the second round, and that was sad. However, this year they're up 1-0 on New Jersey, and the vibes are okay.
Oh, yeah, this is one of those weird, podcasting is a form of time travel, because when they're listening to this, they know how it turns out. But yeah. So hopefully we come back for part 2 and we're feeling good.
And when you come back, please tell me that the parade was super cool.
Okay, so we got books this month, but before that, we should do a Miyazaki Minute. We don't have many of these left, but you and I both watched Nausicaä, The Valley in the Wind.
Yeah, slowly approaching midnight with our Miyazaki Minutes.
Yeah, I know. Just 2 left, I think, after this. So, okay, quick, spoiler-free thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I really enjoy, as I've said this multiple times with the Miyazaki movies, and that while the child slice of life movies are good, the family slice of life movies, the ones with actual conflict are also really, really good. And this is one for the same thing with Nausicaä. I enjoy. This movie came out in the 80s?
So this was
90s?
84, a year before he co-founded Studio Ghibli. So this is really fascinating, that one.
Yeah, and it was in that era of time where we were getting a lot of these animated, either from the East or the West, where we have these really weird environments with these weird monsters and this post-apocalyptic pre-rebirth kind of civilizations. And I just love how it starts off with she's just hanging out in this really toxic area and just hunting down these monsters, and and then she's just hanging out.
Yeah, it was cool. So it is this kind of post-apocalyptic. There's been this poison. The Earth has been destroyed for reasons that we don't know. But if you've seen Miyazaki movies before, you have a good sense of why. Yeah. And there's this encroaching poisonous jungle that starts taking over. And Nausicaä is princess in this kind of luscious valley where the wind and the ocean keeps it preserved. But there's this fear: will the jungle destroy them, or will the other civilizations around them destroy them? And I think it's a pretty cool setup. And it comes from one of his graphic novels that he wrote first. But I recommend this one. It has certain things that later, certain themes and motifs that you can pick up, I see that in kind of fleshed out in future, movies there. There's a lot of that kind of our relationship with the earth, what we initially identify as monsters and those kind of things there. Smart grannies, pacifism. Yeah. There's a lot of those neat elements that's cool to kind of see there. Exposition was different here. This one's a lot more direct. The characters and maybe this is the translation or something, will just kind of stare at the camera and say something hard to believe these spores could kill me. 5 minutes without this mask and I'd be dead. We're talking to themselves, whereas I feel like later it's a little more show than tell. But then again, some Miyazaki later movies can be a little bit opaque and abstract, whereas this one just kind of lays it out for you with the exposition.
Yeah, I feel like talking about the themes, one of them I would just add on, and I think this is something that really latches on in a lot of Miyazaki movies, is the strength of community. Yeah. And of building community. Yeah. I think going back to our very first episode that we did, which was The Boy and the Heron. Yeah. We talked about, what you could build if you built community. But instead, like, we had, the fascist birds and not inviting anybody else in.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, anti-fascist it shows up here as well.
Yeah.
As it might in the next one, if I understand. So we just have Porco Rosso, I don't know how to pronounce it yet. And then his first one, Castle of Cagliostro, which is like a part 2 to something else. I feel like, do we go with the pig pilot first and then we end with his first movie?
Yes, let's do Porco Rosso next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, watch that before our next one. But today, though, we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the River Has Roots, just published in March of this year, an epistolary. That's the one.
Yes.
A bunch of letters.
Yes.
No. I messed that up too. No, this one, I don't know the format. I just know that it's by Amal El-Mohtar, the same author as This Is How You Lose the Time War, which was co-authored with Max Gladstone, and we both love. And that's the epistolary. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
We have just ended the Lenten season, and we are using the word epistle.
yes. That's why we chose it. Yeah. So yeah, to be honest, I don't even know anything about this. I just know that I love this. Do you know anything about this?
I don't.
This novella?
I was recently visiting some friends in Durham, and when I was leaving, I saw the book there. And so I texted my friends. I'm like, hey, can I borrow this? Have you read it?
Nice.
They haven't read it yet, so I'm going to borrow it. And I was just like, oh, wow, this is the book in the wild.
Yeah. I think quick, it's just 130 pages or so. So yeah, once we stop this part 1, there's no spoilers here. Of course, we haven't read it. Then go read it, and then you can come back for part 2. But what we can talk about is briefly what we loved about This Is How You Lose the Time War.
Yes.
And why that convinced us to kind of use this follow-up novella, sight unseen.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to talk about This Is How You Lose the Time War without spoils also.
Yes, that is a good point.
Please visit your local library and read that book along with this one. So this is only 130 pages. This Is How You Lose the Time War is great. Now, I will say, I think I told you this. It took me 2 times to read it.
Right.
I read it the first time, and I couldn't quite get hook. I mean, the hook and the bait was there. I was reading along, and it just didn't pull me. And then I remember hearing a lot of people talking about it. I'm like, all right, let me go and sit with this. And I just dug into it. And then I think probably about like 40 pages is usually, it's like, for me, it's about like 20, 30 pages when I make a decision. Same thing with like a movie. Like 15 minutes in, and I've made a decision. I made myself get through the vegetables, which I actually like. So you know what I mean. But I got through that, and I'm like, oh, I see this here, and I really enjoy this. So I think what the setup for This Is How You Lose the Time War, the very first chapter, one person picks up a sealed envelope that says "burn before reading," which is enough of a hook there.
Yeah, because it's this kind of like multiversal war between Agents Red and Blue and these kind of sworn enemies, and they're leaving themselves notes in these bizarre, creative, inventive ways, and this back and forth taunting each other, and little by little, well, this goes into, no spoilers, but it is a very different feeling novel. And part of it is that, the word I can't pronounce, I don't know, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was, the letters. You don't see that format too often anymore. So that might be part of why if you do kind of bump up against it first, just keep going. It's worth plowing through.
And what's really interesting about the 2 agents is that they, as you mentioned, they represent 2 different organizations.
Yes.
And one is Garden, which is, they feature more on organic beings and flower and growth. And
they're in the Valley of the Wind. Yeah.
Yes. And the other one is very synthetic and robotic and
technocratic.
And it's really interesting, just like they're both operating for the futures that they are told to want.
Yeah. Well put. And just one of the things I think, the ways in which this format, it's it allows for some really beautiful poetic prose because it is just these quick, short letters. It reminded me of Italo Calvino's, like, I don't know, Invisible Cities, or a lot of his writing, and that it can be really witty and snappy and creative and play around with some beautiful, beautiful language in a way that's harder to do when it's a 20-page chapter.
Yeah.
You know?
And what's going to be interesting for us in reading The River Has Roots, this is how you lose the Time War, is actually, as we mentioned, co-authored between Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone, and that they each wrote chapters corresponding to their agent.
Right. Good point. Good point.
So this will be our first time reading a book that is solely written by her.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know how else to set it up because I know nothing about the book, but I'm kind of excited for that.
I think this is our first time going into something where we both have not. Well, I think maybe the second time. The very first episode we did Miyazaki.
Yeah,
Boy the Heron.
You had watched enough. Oftentimes there's this idea one of us is familiar with the content, be it in general like Miyazaki, or like I've read this, watched this, played this, or something. Animal Well. Yeah. Yeah, Animal Well.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise, us both going in, who knows? I'm excited. All right, so yeah, we'll pause. You'll hear some music, there. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about it in spoilers. So go pick up the book, support your local bookstores, your local libraries, get it there. Don't give Amazon any more money. And then come back to talk about The River Has Roots. Let's do this.
I want to hear about your bookmarks.
Yes. All right, we are back. The River Has Roots. Amal El-Mohtar. All right, Jonathan. What are you? Where's your head at in terms of this novella?
It was so heartwarming, and I don't know if like wholly, like when I say wholly, I mean like entirely heartwarming. But I do enjoy the way that it told the story, and that more or less we got a happily ever after at the end. I've read some books where have been some tough reads, so it's been nice to get something that was nice at the end.
Yeah, but in a really fascinating way. Like, this is, in a sense, kind of a fairy tale, but it's a fairy tale that like kind of plays with the trope. And even actually, and we said this right before, but just spoilers are coming in about 12 seconds. So if you haven't yet read this, you can read it in a day. But yeah, read it before you get here. But even something I didn't realize until preparing for the show was that this was actually based off of like a 17th century ballad, or I should say ballad type, where there's a type of story that in which you have two sisters are courted by the same man, and the man prefers the younger sister. So then the older sister murders the younger sister, typically by drowning. Then the younger sister comes back in the form of an instrument and snitches on the older sister, and then there's comeuppance and all that. Yeah. And I was listening to some interviews, and Mohtar said that like essentially there's all these different versions of it, and it always bugged her that this like slimy dude that's hitting on sisters and be like, hey, either of you will work, that he was never the villain, and it was always these sisters played off of each other. So she wanted to write a story that's like, well, no, maybe it's the sisters bond that's stronger as opposed to this,
And I
dude.
do appreciate when you're talking about that very early on in the story, it does allude to that, about how, there's a lot of stories about how these two sisters, they don't get along, and their beauty drives them both apart. Yeah. And it hints that it could happen. Yep. And then you feel the tension between the two of them, and it resolves the way that it does, which is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I suppose, maybe we do a quick summary, and then we'll start talking about all the different things that we kind of liked about it. So, okay, and jump in so there's this land right on the edge of Fairy, or Arcadia, as it's called there, and it's guarded by this river running one direction, out of Fairy, with these two beautiful willow trees kind of guarding it, called the Professors. And there's this family, the Hawthorns, I think was their surname.
That's correct.
That nourish it with song. They don't even know why. It's just been passed on and passed on. It just becomes part of who they are in this land. And you have these two sisters that do that singing, this musical connection. Esther, the older one, reserved and thoughtful, and Isabel, the younger one.
Isabel spelled with a Y, by the way, which is beautiful.
It is.
Ysabel, to be clear.
Yes. Great spell.
Yeah.
And you get in these two contrasting, I guess, suitors. So one, the quote unquote proper suitor, Samuel Pollard, a neighbor who seems like he should be, like, essentially you can see the version of him in those old ballads. Like, this is the prince from next door who's going to save these, one of the sisters. And he's essentially like, he'll marry either of them because what he wants is the land. He wants their money. And then, but Esther is also, I suppose, courted by Rin, this shape-shifting, I'm going to say figure, because the book plays around with gender. And they're from Fairy. They're from Arcadia. But she's actually more drawn to Rin. That's actually where her heart is and where the love is, and the one that actually loves her for who she is, not just her land and her money. So Pollard drowns Esther and then is about to marry Isabel. Esther is saved by Rin, brought into the land of Fairy, but only way... Yeah.
Esther not saved by Ren, saved by the river itself.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that is a great point in distinguishing kind of figure, and a way in which this book is in kind of conversation with all these other fairy stories from across the ages. And then she finds a way to come back to warn Isabel in the form of a harp, and their duet, where she then rats on Pollard. And that's the sort of happily ever after, because she's able to keep her life in Fairy, and they're able to kind of connect back and forth.
And Isabel comes to visit with the clogs made out of willow to conduct the magic to be able to be safe in going into Arcadia.
Yes.
So what I really loved so much about the story is something that it really tickled my brain in a particular way. And the fact we were talking about before recording the second half is how magic is referred to and converse in the form of grammar and in language. And I love how the way that Amal sets up this book is that it's ambiguous on whether it is a magical land or not. It says, okay, well, the water and the trees are filled with grammar. Okay, but what does that mean? Is that magic or not? And then you learn that it is magic. And just the fact that, that grammar itself is what they call magic and the properties. And the book does, in turn, play with language. You first meet the willow trees who are named the professors, right? And you would think that these are known as teachers, but no, these are lovers that are professing to each other across the river Liss. So you get that. And Esther being saved because right before she was drowned by Samuel Pollard, she became engaged to Ren. And I did also enjoy how, Ren was never given a figure. They were just an embodiment of nature, right? Because they came in a different form every single time that they showed up. And because, they had just become bonded, Ren had taken a ribbon out of her hair and placed it into the river and formed engagement rings, right? And Esther, wearing this ring, when she is drowned in the river, she comes back as a swan, to which we are learned, just to do a little bit of mental gymnastics, that a swan is a signet, and she's wearing a signet ring.
And that playing with language. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to think of magic, because, and I was listening to an interview with Mohtar, and she talked about, the closest, I shouldn't even say closest, that storytelling is a form of magic.
Yes.
You create a world out of nothing other than the words that you create and play with and tinker with. and that world becomes real to people. And you know, she even kind of backed it up etymologically speaking, that grammar and grimoire have like similar kind of roots, and all those kind of things. And it's kind of a neat idea that, you know, and even there's been some fascinating studies about language and what languages you speak, how it kind of plays with your mind a little. I think about that sometimes, like with German, oftentimes if you have a helper verb, that the verb is at the end of the sentence. So that changes how you think and interact, that you have to wait till the end to figure out what the action is and some of those kind of things. So grammar changes the world and how we perceive the world in really kind of fascinating ways. And that when you change the grammar of something, it can be astounding. Like the difference from, I don't know, living present participle, if I have that right, to lived past tense, like that's a big difference.
And there was a passage in here, I can't remember where exactly it was, where she talks about, you know, conjugation, because that is one of the forms of the use of magic is conjugation. Yeah, go.
What is magic but a change in the world? What is conjugation but a transformation? One thing into another. She runs, she ran, she will run again.
Yes.
You know, and then later there's a similar, but that is the nature of grammar. It is always tense like an instrument, aching for release, longing to transform present into past, into future, is into was, into will.
Yes. Like, oh my gosh. Like... It's right there. It's right there. Yeah. It's so good. And so like it's not just a small tangent here. It's not just the fact that the words and the writing in this book is beautiful. The book itself is beautiful. There's illustrations everywhere. There's willow branches because you know the main figures of this are the willow trees and the willow that conducts the grammar in this world. There's willow branches that hang over the center of each page spread in the book, which is just gorgeous. And it was fun for me thinking about this, and that, you know, this book is a little bit a study in how, you know, words have meaning, right? And the river is willing to, you know, to interpret things as it sees fit. And it's so fun, just like as we're talking about language now, we are in, you know, we're in family environments. You have young children. I have nieces and nephews. And we get to study how the English language changes through the way that our younger relations will talk. I remember I was visiting my family last November, and my 7-8-year-old niece was upset about something and said that it was so not skibbity, right? And those are things, it's just like, those are things that are not for us, but those are words that have power for that generation. And also what was fun for me recently, thinking about how the younger generation talks about how someone or person has riz, and then at one point I'm like, oh, is this just an etymological breakdown of charisma? And I'm like, is that what's happening now?
Yeah, and you know, and part of the through line in this is that grammar used to be wild, which then grammar equals magic. That's kind of a through line in a lot of fairy stories, like Susanna Clarke, the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell here, that there was a time in which magic was much more real. Piranesi, she does a similar kind of thing, and we can kind of recapture it. And we think of grammar now as being not wild, but dry and boring, and something that is set in stone and cannot change. It's something that you break or don't break. When the fact is, that's not what grammar is. No. Grammar, especially in the English language, is this agreed upon set of rules that is constantly evolving. And who gets to decide what is proper and what is improper is a question of power. So those kind of things of just like the younger generation playing with grammar, then a question of that power struggle of will those become codified? Like even going back to this inadvertent early autistic corner, but like, you know, 1066, William the Conqueror comes in, and then all of a sudden the English language blends with like those kind of that Germanic kind of English from Old English and all that to now these French words coming in. And what you had then was like the French words, which you would think would be much less proper because they weren't English. But the people in power were speaking French. So the French versions, the French grammar, those were what was proper and high class and respected, and those kind of ancient Germanic ones were not. So you think of like the difference between like beef is fancy and steak is not. Or even just think of like a great example is just like swear words. If you go through, I don't want to get this episode tagged, so just mentally, listeners, run those through your head and think about, none of them are French sounding. They are all the Germanic kind of sounding words. They're not improper because they're inherently improper. Because grammar is set in stone. They're improper because they signify that you are of a lesser group, you know? So I like that inspection of grammar as a thing that we do, a spell that we cast that can connect and empower people, like the words do at the end of this story to free someone, or they can imprison someone by saying like, no, you are less than because of how you use words.
Yeah. I'm going to hop from here. I don't have a good transition, but it was just like, it was sitting in my head about how Esther did get saved at the end, right?
Yeah.
So we get to Agnes Crow. First of all, it's gorgeous and beautiful metaphorically, just in the way of how the river itself, knowing that it has been fed and supplied and sheltered by Esther and Isabel, by them feeding the professors, then in turn took the time to save Esther by reversing its entire course, right?
Yes.
And it runs her into Arcadia, where Agnes Crow is.
Only happened twice. Once to save Esther, and two, so Chicago could send all of its poop to St. Louis when they reversed the flow of that river. The only two times in history, literary and then we died or historical. River Green. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I interrupted. Go on.
But yeah, so because she has been conjugated into a swan, as it is described in the book, she needs to be then conjugated back into her human form. And she is, brought back into a human form, and then she learns that, yes, she did, in fact, die on the other side of the river. Also, okay, I needed to go back here about how much that this book is talking about language, the difference between Arcadia and where the Hawthorns are. I forget the name of that land, but the difference between them is the modal lands.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, cool.
It's just so good. I love the attention and just the thought that was put into this. But okay, so she gets, conjugated back into a human form by taking all of these different forms, and Agnes tells Wren to not let go the entire time. And she becomes like a vapor and snow and stinging nettles and everything before she goes back into her human form. And then I loved how, as you're talking about, this being a fairy tale that's been passed down, it does then touch on the trope of losing one's name, right? If you give your name, then you will lose it. And also how much that words have power, which has been, one of the main through lines in this book. Because as Agnes said, how if you start to say something multiple times, it starts to lose its meaning and its power. The same thing can happen to your name. And it's like you cannot use your name until you are ready for whatever form that you are willing to take.
Yeah, that is a beautiful thought. Do you want to then talk about some of the other examples of just kind of beautiful, her writing style?
Before we get to the writing style, I just also want to touch on the fact that this has one of my favorite villain deaths that I've read in a while.
Let's talk about... can I set the stage first?
Yes.
There is a quote. This probably links to the description of Samuel Pollard. So if I can just read that paragraph, and then you can talk about why you loved, which I think will set that up. All right, there is Samuel Pollard, the Hawthorns' nearest neighbor, a gentleman farmer. He owned the Thistle Ford Bridge and several fields downriver from the Hawthorns' willow stands.
A union between their families would bring about union of their lands and draw the Hawthorns closer to the wholesome, settled tameness of Thistleford. This, in and of itself, was not so terrible, except that Esther could not bear Samuel Pollard's company. His eyes always had the soft, beseeching expression of a whining dog. His hands, baffingly, were always somehow both cold and moist, and he was forever finding ways to accidentally brush Esther's skin with them. He had gone to one of the great universities, Esther refused to remember which, and returned speaking both Latin and poetry, which he saw fit to share as often as he could, though he plainly spoke neither very well. He thought himself gallant, he aspired to gallantry, and he often brought Esther and Isabel little gifts from his trips to London and Exeter, hinting of his political prospects to their bemused parents. Esther regarded him with that species of contempt bred by long familiarity and short temper.
Yeah. What a great way to set him up. And also, I just love how just multiple times in here that Esther goes after Isabel, like, why do you allow this man to basically bother you until you pet him?
yeah.
It's like amazing.
So what? Speak on his death then. That was setting him up. How did they knock him down?
So the only thing he really wanted, he didn't really want either sister for having the sister, as he laid out in the fact that, like, I would be happy to let you have your dalliances as long as that favors return. It's just like, this is not love. We talked about this when we did the Phantom of the Opera episode. Like, both of our listeners, as Esther would say, demand better. Right?
Yeah.
Demand
Princess
better.
Bride is doing a lot of heavy lifting on the Good Art Friends and even that's not perfect, but for any kind of, romantic love.
Yes.
All right, but go on.
And so when Esther rats him out and tells him, hey, why don't you take your hands out your pockets? Because when he drowned her, the river, turned Esther into a swan and changed his hands, which were submerged, into fish scales. And it was very funny because, like, the very first time that Isabel walks with Samuel, it's noted that he smells faintly of fish, and then you find out why later.
Cold and moist hands.
Yeah, as Isabel is given the opportunity to lay out what she wishes to happen, and the town wanted to hang him, I think, something like that. But instead, what they did, they brought him to this spot in the land between both of their families' properties and forced him to drink from the river. And the river turned him into a tree because all he wanted was to expand and have more willows so that he could be able to sell, because the Hawthorne name was so mighty and bright that he would be able to sell the wood no matter what. And he got turned into a tree by the river that bleeds when it's cut.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and, as you say that, you do have these two contrasting moments of characters, Esther and Pollard, that connect with the river and how the river connects back. It's kind of like Last Crusade a little, which cup you're choosing, and that they sing to the trees, they show reverence to the land, without fully understanding what the contract is. They're not doing it to get something in return. They're doing it out of respect for the world. And it pays off. And for Pollard, who is thinking contractually, he gets what he put in. Yeah. But yeah, in each of these, it's just, the plotting is great. Everything's kind of set up and all those kind of things. And partially, Mohtar is, her history is in short stories. So I think you have that. And even this is a tightly scripted novella that actually started as a short story and then was expanded from a novelette to a novella. But it's just kind of tightly paced there. And the writing itself has this beautiful lyrical poetic and even playful quality without being. Sometimes you read a writer that's playing with language in a way that takes you out of the story, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps because this is such a fairy tale, she kind of threaded that needle perfectly to me. She played with language in a way that seemed to complement the story, not detract from it, you know?
Yeah, if I can add on to that, it's written in a way that makes you think about how the words are used, but it doesn't force you to understand it to be able to read the book.
Yeah, well put. Well put. Yeah, and there's just so many just beautiful descriptions and just sentences that you could pull from the book and put on a work of art. Like, I like this description of Esther's how she interacted and thought of Rin. Says she couldn't put words to the look on Rin's face. She only knew, sharply and deeply, that she wanted to go on being the cause of it. Like, that's... I love that. Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
Excuse me. Yeah, What were your thoughts on her version of fairy? Because that's something that shows up throughout the centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And different authors play with it, from Tolkien through, through Mohtar. What were your thoughts on Arcadia and how she wrote that?
On Arcadia?
Yeah.
It was really interesting because, we only go into Arcadia, twice in the book.
Yeah, I mean, you have that flashback when the kids were there, like chasing the chicken and stuff like that. But yeah.
I don't know. It's trying to think of the best way that I can describe this, because I haven't really read the Chronicles of Narnia. I think I read it once forever ago, and I don't really remember it. But it kind of gives that kind of quality. I just this deep, lush wood that is at the same time vibrant and foreboding.
Yes, exactly. That raw power there that can be that almost seems in some ways morally neutral. And maybe it's what you put in, you get out, going back to those two characters, how they interact. And that, it made me think a bit of Heather Foss has this great Emily Wilde series, the characters studying, going into fairy, and it's showing that it can be beautiful and magical and incredible, but also it can be dangerous. Susanna Clark's Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell, I think is another good example of that. And I she kind of tapped into that tradition with it, which I liked.
Yeah.
And her description's great too. This quote I liked, there are lands that are near, talking about fairy. There are lands that are near to us geographically, but far from us temporarily. Yes. London is not Londinium, though it's built from its bones. There are lands that are near to us temporally, but far from us geographically. We can be certain that at this moment in Italy, someone is sitting down to their breakfast with a newspaper dated roughly the same as ours, though we cannot expect to reach them in time to join them for the meal. When Arcadia overlaps with the lands we know, it takes years to journey into it. When Arcadia is some distance away, it is possible to conceive of it as contemporary. It is always both at a remove and always immediate, always near to hand and very far away.
I love that because it's a description of the modern world that we live in right now. But you can also just transport yourself out of the book because you've been reading for a little while and you think about how everything is, and there is no long distance communication, and yet still at the same time we are still closely knit by time and distance no matter what.
And yet that all that modernity, there's just layers of complication. And there's something about Arcadia here or fairy in other stories where it's almost always stripped of those modern touches, where everything is very natural in a beautiful but kind of horrifying way. So that creates this fascinating mirror to our world when you see something like Arcadia that doesn't have the same dangers that Esther is facing with Pollard, but it has very much other dangers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just opened this book just trying to find you can find anything gorgeous on any page, but I also found the moment that I was really trying to find talking about Samuel Pollard.
Yeah.
Isabel speaking to, Esther speaking to Isabel, quote, Belle, he's like a bit of bread that's been dropped in a pond. If the bread could also beg a duck to eat him.
Yeah, it's just very witty and playful.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. What else you want to talk about?
Gosh, I really did love, just again, going back to the ending about how it was nice to get a happy ever after moment. Like, yes, Esther died in the land that she grew up in, and she can never return in the form that she was born into. And she was going to have to leave and never see her family and not see her sister raising her children, which is the one thing that she really wanted in her life. And at the end, we see that Wren taught Isabel how to visit safely.
Yeah.
And, it gets set up of how, like, because these two lands are, again, close geographically, but far temporally.
Yeah.
Which is always really interesting about how, like, you show up there and it could be the same day, but, hours earlier or later.
Yeah.
Or you spend, like, when the kids were lost there, they were lost for, like, a few hours, it felt like, and it was only minutes when they got back home and they were rescued by Agnes Crow. And Wren is setting the table and said, but we're expecting a visitor, but expecting is not the same as, as arriving or something along those lines. And then Isabel shows up at the door with her child on her back, sitting down for dinner with Wren and Esther. And I love that. It's gorgeous. I love how it gives you the resolve to the dissonant melody that we had.
Yeah, that's well put. And you use these musical terms throughout that. And I think that's fitting because I suppose that's another part of the book that we haven't talked too much about, but the importance of music and harmony, the two sisters kind of connecting. And even like the book itself was dedicated to two people, Mohtar's sister, fittingly, but also her music teacher. And those two strands coming together, I think, are important. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Because I was just thinking... the inscription, right? The inscription of this book really sets up just talking about music and what you're going to get yourself into. What is a river but an open throat? What is water but a voice?
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, any other thoughts that you wanted to share on The River Has Roots?
Please go visit your local library or your local bookstore and get a copy of this. The cover is splendid, and again, there's art inside the book everywhere.
Yeah, though, and I've also heard that the audiobook, they have like beautiful like chanting, and the music becomes a part of the experience too. So yeah. So buy it from your local bookstore and then buy the audiobook.
Yes.
Yeah, both those. Well put. So let's see, what topic do we have coming up next month?
Yeah, we're doing everything the opposite of this book. We're getting sad and existential. We're going to be talking about the stunner of an album, Brave Faces Everyone by Spanish Love Songs.
I'm excited. You bring up this album probably weekly.
Probably.
And I've never really sat down and listened to the whole thing, just snippets from here and there. So yeah, well, I'm looking forward to diving into that album with you. All right, Jonathan, my good friend, thank you for talking about good art with me this month.
All right, had a lot of fun. Looking forward to the next one.
Bye.